What is up? Probably not ladies and just gentlemen. Welcome to the channel. This is MMA Productions. And for the first video on my channel, we are going to be breaking down the fundamentals, MMA presence, and history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm probably going to make a few videos that are in a similar fashion to this, just so that people who, like me, have only gotten into MMA in the past few years, and maybe you, I don't know, can have a better understanding of these individual martial arts, their strengths and weaknesses, and how they're applied in the sport of MMA. And I'm going to make it very clear from the start that not only is there no one martial art that's really going to be totally superior in any way to any other one, but also you cannot be a purist. You have to train pretty much everything to understand how to defend it and how to take advantage of the opportunities and openings that are available within the sport of MMA that makes it unique from things like boxing and kickboxing and even individually wrestling or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But let's get right into it. So the fundamentals of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are that it is a ground-based and grappling martial art, and size doesn't really matter in it. The whole point of it, originally even, with Royce Gracie being a 170-pound man fighting heavyweights, is that you use leverage of your opponents and your own speed and flexibility to end the fight. It isn't about just being bigger or just being stronger. It's about using leverage, like I said. There is gi and no-gi jiu-jitsu. We're going to be focusing on no-gi and how that works today, because I can't think of a single MMA organization that still has gi jiu-jitsu. It's not UFC 1 anymore. We've moved on from that. But jiu-jitsu is pretty much entirely focused on submissions and the ability to transition to them from a variety of positions. There is a lot of submissions, a lot of which you will probably never see in the UFC, but they mainly focus on chokes, joint locks, and compression locks. In the case of gi jiu-jitsu, the gi can be used in a lot of ways, like for chokes, but yet again, no gi in MMA, so we're not going to be caring about that today. And the biggest thing is knowledge of these positions and transitions, because that's pretty much entirely what it comes down to in a jiu-jitsu match, is who has more experience or who understands their positions and the submissions they have available from there better. So there's a lot more positions than what I'm showing here. There's also knee on belly, omoplata, rubber guard, but those are kind of niche. You don't see them as often. But positions are normally measured, I guess is the right word, in terms of dominance and control. In the majority of these scenarios, the person on top is considered to be in the dominant position. Although bottom fighters do have a lot of options from there. So right here we got side control. From there you can get to things like kimuras or head and arm chokes with some availability of ground and pound. Full guard and full mount, excellent ground and pound availability, especially when, obviously in the sport of MMA especially, it opens up elbows, especially 12-6, punches, things like that. Lots of submissions available from there too, and good transitions. Half guard, same thing. Crucifix, you can get some nasty ground and pound from there if you're in the right position and you know what you're doing. Demetrius Johnson, as an example, getting to his armbar on Kyoji Horiguchi from crucifix. Back mount, probably the best position in BJJ. You'll see later, by far the most common submission is an RNC. Inside and outside the UFC, inside and outside MMA as a sport even. North-south, you normally see that when people are trying to like roll out of a position or even sprawling. Justin Gaethje, he can get some nasty punches in there. You saw that in him versus Patty. You can get a headlock in there, like a ninja choke. There's also a 50-50, which leg locks are available from. Very dangerous. As you can see, Corey Sandhagen and Davison Figueiredo, if you make the wrong move, you could just completely blow out your ACL. The submission, that's a pretty weird position to get to. You don't see it too often. You mostly see it between two jiu-jitsu specialists, I would say. There's obviously a lot more submissions than what I'm showing here. There's literally dozens, a lot of which you just don't see because they're weirdly niche. You need weird positions. I put a calf slicer on there because I got hit with one for the first time recently, and it sucks. These kind of pressure ones like that aren't as common. You see the same thing with the armbar ones. Recently, we saw a capsule lock for the first time in the UFC. We'll get into that later. Rear nakeds, by far the most common submission in the game. You see them pretty much once or twice a card, I'd say, at least attempts especially. Arm bars, pretty rare. They're pretty easy to defend within the sport of MMA. Guillotines, also pretty common. You'll see people jump them a lot and fail them and put themselves on their back for no reason. You see this a lot with Dustin Poirier, especially in his fight with BSD. Triangle chokes. This is one of those ones that's available from the bottom position. You see this pretty often. It's kind of hard to get to. You need some pretty intense flexibility, and they're relatively defendable. Darce chokes are becoming very common recently, especially with guys like Islam Makhachev, who just have mean darces. Head and arm choke / triangle. These are available from a lot of top positions. They require some transitioning to get to, but also very effective. And Kimuras, you barely see these anymore. A lot of people will threaten them to prevent transitions and people from getting up, but that's pretty much the extent of their use that I've seen in the time that I've been watching MMA. The position-submission relationship is obviously the most important aspect of BJJ. Certain submissions are best reached from their respective positions. Like, you probably want to start in side control or half guard for a head and arm triangle. You probably want to be on bottom for a triangle. There are people that have gotten them from top, but it's just rare. But at the highest levels, a lot of that stuff doesn't really matter as much. You see it with Yaroslav Amosov a lot. He's a fantastic grappler. What he did to Neil Magny, how he got on that choke. You don't see things like that often. Another great example I said earlier, Demetrius Johnson getting to his armbar and Kyoji Horiguchi from Crucifix. You don't see that type of thing often. Some are very reactive, like a guillotine. You'll see a lot of people just pulling them when they're about to get taken down. Again, I started doing BJJ. I'm getting hit with those constantly. There are so many other positions, though. There are even variations of certain submissions. So right here you can see on the top left picture there, that's a capsule lock that was achieved very recently by Ardalian. It's pretty much just a variation of a calf slicer. Sean Brady is very good at his one-arm ghillie. And while there are a lot of submissions, you would think that these rare ones would be, like, whoa, they just pulled that out and people wouldn't be expecting it. But they're rare for a reason. You'll never see a lot of the BS 10th Planet is doing. Like, you'll see Joe Rogan every card. Oh, he's going for a dead orchid. And then they never get it because it's just not going to work in MMA. Some submissions will simply never see the light of day in the sport. Shout out Nate Latshaw on X. I saw this earlier where he gave a breakdown. I don't know if it was him, but he posted it originally. Yeah, you can see the source right there. Of all the most common submissions. As you can see, the two most common by far are ghillies and rear nakeds. Arm bars are pretty common, but I've been seeing them less lately. Arm triangle is also very common. And then I'd say triangle chokes are less common because you don't really want to be in bottom position, although they are very effective from bottom position. Like, you see guys like Charles Oliveira do them a lot. And then you see it here. All these rare ones, they don't happen for a reason. Twisters are rare because they're so hard to get them into that type of position and control them in that kind of position. Most of the time, I would say things like that take a pretty big difference in knowledge of grappling and BJJ. So the strengths and weaknesses of BJJ, they almost form like a yin-yang to me, where some of the strengths are weaknesses, but they can kind of be compensated for. The general rule of thumb, though, is that you just can't be a purist. You see it with, like, Marcus Buchecha recently. Like, it just doesn't work to be a purist. Or, like, Chrome Gracie getting absolutely slammed by Bryce Mitchell because he didn't know how to do anything but jiu-jitsu. He pulled guards so many times in that fight. Even Joe Rogan was starting to groan by the end. But the biggest strengths, probably the biggest strength of BJJ, is the sheer number of submissions that you learn by consistently training it. There's submissions from bottom, side control, full mount, full guard, so many different positions. Bottom defense is excellent if you train it a lot, like Gilbert Burns and Charles Oliveira, very dangerous on their backs. So, like Charles Oliveira is infamous for all of his recoveries from getting dropped. It's because he's so good off his back because of the level of his jiu-jitsu. There's excellent positional dominance, where the ability to threaten submissions like Kimura's can keep somebody in a position. or you could just hold them there because you know what their next move is going to be. There's a lot of stall power that comes with that if you're a little bit up on scorecards and they don't want to risk the opponent getting up. And it combines excellently with other martial arts like judo and wrestling, which gets us into our first weakness. There's very little focus on takedowns in BJJ. It's mostly about pulling, like a lot of times you'll see people pulling guard like Mike Buscemi in UFC, BJJ, or Kron Gracie and what happened to him against Bryce Mitchell, as mentioned earlier. And being on your back is one of the worst bases for MMA because of ground and pound, because of those 12 to 6s and just hooks and everything you can throw on the ground. Obviously, there are exceptions, like I mentioned, Charles Oliveira and Gilbert Burns, but those two are exceptional BJJ athletes in the world of MMA. And a lot of times going for these non-choke submissions kind of leaves you open to strikes. That's because a lot of the times you get chokes from the safest positions. But if you slip up on an arm bar, if you go for an arm bar, they can hit you or just guard it, and then they're up, or they even get a dominant position on you from that. And it's been around so long in the UFC that people have kind of adapted. I mean, like a big example I think of is if you look at the featherweight division, it was pretty much all strikers for a long time because Jose Aldo's takedown defense was so good that it just didn't matter anymore. You needed guys like Max Holloway with the kickboxing of Alexander Volkanovski or McGregor to just take him down in striking. And now we're finally seeing some more grappling again. Obviously, Movsar Evloev's probably going to be fighting for a belt soon. He's a great grappler. Aljamain Sterling, all-time great bantamweight. He just moved up to feather. He's going to be one of the better grapplers in that division. Even Diego Lopez, his BJJ, is probably better than a lot of what we've seen the past few years for featherweight. And the final one, it's a little bit more niche, but it just straight up doesn't work on some people. Derek Lewis, you just see him get up a lot. Paul Craig talks about it a lot, and the fact that Sean Strickland no one had ever even attempted to submit Sean Strickland in the UFC until the Hamzat Chimaev fight. And Craig Jones talks about how he's super hard to submit. It's just, BJJ doesn't work on some people, especially like wrestlers from like that Eastern Europe kind of area. They just know how to counter it, and Sambo and to an extent like Greco-Roman wrestling are somewhat natural counters to BJJ. BJJ has a very extensive history, not as much so as a lot of other martial arts like boxing and kickboxing, but it originates from around 1925 Brazil with the Gracie family and Mitsuyo Maeda, who initially taught the Gracies how to wrestle and do some like Japanese jiu-jitsu, and they adapted it. As mentioned in the first slide, it's pretty much made for smaller opponents like Royce Gracie fighting heavyweights to have some form of advantage over larger, stronger opponents. A big thing is that despite the kind of recent anti-BJJ trend you see from these caucus guys in the UFC, we would not have the UFC without BJJ. And every UFC athlete has to learn some level of BJJ because of the amount of jiu-jitsu athletes that transition to MMA. It's still one of the most vital parts of the sport and probably always will be. We've gotten so many incredible fighters from it. Say what you want about the early UFCs and the Gracies. Royce Gracie is, the first UFC champion. He exposed the world to jiu-jitsu and what it can do. The Diaz brothers are beloved by so many people. They're jiu-jitsu specialists. Charles Oliveira might be one of the biggest fan favorite fighters ever. And he's a monster with jiu-jitsu. He's the greatest finisher in UFC history, largely due to his submission capabilities. Demetrius Johnson used his BJJ to a fantastic extent in the sport of MMA and saved his brain from CTE by doing that grappling and still having entertaining fights. Alexandria Pantoja, absolute monster. He's called the Cannibal for a reason. He is an RNC demon. I still think he'll beat Joshua Van, if I'm being entirely honest. I could be proven wrong by that, but he's a fantastic grappler. Damian Maia, Jacare Souza, and probably too many to list on here. Tony Ferguson's another example. But BJJ is very important to the sport. That's why it's the first martial art I'm getting into. It's a fundamental of MMA, and we wouldn't have MMA without it. That's about it. I'll see you in the next one. I'll probably be covering Muay Thai. And thank you for watching.